Welcome back to Fed by Fire, the podcast where we turn the heat of life's trials into the fuel that ignites purpose, resilience, and unbreakable strength. I'm your host, Christian Whitlow, and today we are diving even deeper into a topic that's very raw and real and, redemptive. How to start over when drugs and crime are all you've ever known. And if you're listening right now and you have been caught in that cycle, the highs that drag you low, the streets that promise a freedom but it only delivers chains, this episode is for you. And we're talking about that pivotal moment when you decide enough is enough. How to redirect all that energy that you poured into staying high or hustling into something that is meaningful. Your higher purpose, your family, and, we'll break down getting past the guilt, the shame. Those are the things that keep you stuck, and how you can use your hardships as momentum instead of a weapon to hurt yourself or others. And we'll explore, what it really feels like to earn back your family's trust, to step off the sidelines as a parent and become, the parental figure your kids deserve, and how to take routines that you built in jail and make them work on the streets. And most importantly, how to stay positive and stay free when the challenges look straight up impossible. And, this is very personal for me. And folks, I'm just over a year sober now. And let me tell you, around this time last year, I had just come home after, a short 3 months locked up. But I was done. That was my last chance to have a family, to have my kids, to be something, they could be proud of. All I had to do was decide I'd trade in the game and that life for a new one. But the pros versus the cons, I'd been homeless for 5 years. I trusted no one around me. I risked my freedom in every way possible, if you can imagine, just to stay well. I almost lost my arm to xylazine in the process, and if I can do it, you can do it too. And before we dive in, I want to make one thing clear, that everyone's recovery looks different and is different, and what works for one person might not work for another. And some folks, they swear by meetings like AA and NA, and they're great. That structure and, community is great. Others, like me, are different. Me, I still smoke, but, have made a routine, and things like Sublocade have helped manage my cravings and help me stay on track and give me a new life. But I'm not here to preach or to say there's one right way. I'm just sharing what worked for me and the steps, the mindset, and the tools that got me to the point to take, what resonates and leave the rest and build your own path. All right, let's get into it, y'all. And we're going to be extending this episode today, going longer to really unpack each step and share more tools and, give you some actionable advice. So grab your notebook and settle in. Let's light this fire and let it burn bright, baby. Let's get into the first segment. Deciding enough is enough. Look, I've been there. I was deep into the game, the drugs, numbing the pain, crime, paying the bills, but it's all a lie. And the highs fade faster each time. The risks get bigger, and one day you wake up, maybe in a cell, maybe staring at an empty bottle, and think, this ain't life. This is survival mode on repeat. And for me, it was, last year, right around now, I had just done the 3 months, came home, just with the clothes on my back, Before that, I was homeless for 5 years and, was on 200 milligrams of methadone, risking everything, my freedom, my health, just to stay in a cycle. And, none of that got me nowhere. But my wife, she was my rock, and she helped me get through it, as well as my daughter and her mom. And I realized, that, like I said, enough was enough. But let's break this down just a little further. What does enough really mean? It's different for everybody. When the pain of staying the same outweighs the fear of change. So, how do you decide? For me, it started with a spark of honesty. And ask yourself, what am I losing? Your freedom, your health, your future. But you gotta go deeper. What dreams did you bury under, the highs? What relationships did you burn, Step one, hit pause, find a quiet space, away from the crew, away from the temptations, and journal it out. List the wins from your old life. There might be none versus the losers. Be brutal. Lost time with kids, broken relationships, a future in handcuffs. And double check, for me, the cons were just endless. Homelessness, isolation, near-death experiences. But the pros of the game, zilch. Add details. How many nights have you been on the street? How many close calls with law enforcement, have happened? Make it vivid. Step 2, seek a higher perspective. Reflect on what's bigger than you. Your inner strength, your potential. Take a moment to visualize the life you want. Step 3, make the declaration. Tell someone, a trusted friend, a mentor, a sponsor if that's your route, even yourself in the mirror, that I'm done. And, burn a symbol of the old life if it helps, a photo, a stash. I look at my old mugshots sometimes. But this isn't a whim, it's a war cry. Enough is enough. And when you realize your life is worth more than the next fix or score, I traded it for my family. And if I can, then you definitely can. But what's your enough moment? Think on it and pause here if you need to. Reflect, an additional tip, build a vision board, cut out pics of the life you want. Families, dinners, steady job, freedom, contrast, it all with your current chaos. That visual pros versus cons, that sealed it for me. Let's talk about number 2, redirecting your energy from the highs to a purpose like your family or something else important to you. All right. So you've decided to, change your life, quit the hustle, and have the drive to keep grinding and step away from the next hit or the next score. And, I know it's like fire burning, and, the same intensity towards your purpose and whatever's important to you, you can use it. For me, the energy shift was everything. I poured it into rebuilding, my trust with the mother of my daughter, and we have a great relationship now. We share a 2-story house. We have our daughter. We work at the same warehouse, and that hustle I used for the streets, now I use it for showing up as a dad, as a partner, and a man with direction. But let's unpack how to make that shift stick. And why purpose first? Because it's your anchor. And that energy you used to chase highs, you can channel it into self-improvement, goals, growth. But start small, 10 minutes a day of reading or planning, build a routine. Wake up, affirm your goals, build strength. It sounds corny, but with your family, you've probably been absent, maybe hurtful. That same grind, use it to show up. Call your kids daily. help them with homework, cook a meal. It's not about the grand gestures. It's about consistency, because all they want to do is be a part of your life. Remember how you'd hustle all night for a score, or hustle all day for the smiles of people that didn't matter? For me, deciding to trade that old life with risk and highs for this new one, and look at us now, stable, together, proud. But add layers, learn their love languages, their words, acts of service, a practical tip, or as people say, an energy audit. Track your day like you tracked your supply. Where's the waste? Cut it and replace scrolling with, maybe playing some Jenga, or just being more present, and, go a little further and set energy goals. Today I will invest, in one family memory. And, tonight list 3 ways that, you've hustled negatively, and flip them. I stayed up scheming becomes I stayed up planning for a family event or for a job interview. Not tomorrow, but today, and you can do it. And after 5 years of homelessness and all the bullshit I went through, believe me, I'm not telling you something too far-fetched. And that's what Fed by Fire is all about. But let's get into segment 3, getting past the guilt and shame, because that's one thing that ate me alive. The guilt and shame, they're like shadows that follow you out of the dark. They're going to be there. Guilt says, I did wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. And, both can paralyze you, but you can get past that. And, coming home, last time I had a lot of guilt. It hit me hard. I'd risked everything for nothing. I'd hurt my family. I'd been absent in my kid's life, and I almost destroyed myself in the process. But I acknowledge it. I don't bury it, and that'll explode later. But you gotta be real with yourself before you can be real with anyone else. So confess to a trusted person, and just let it out what you've been going through. But it's easier said than done. But you just gotta keep moving forward, and hold on to is who you are, who you want to be forever. For me, it was listing, everything I wanted in my new life versus my old life, and just deciding to let it all go. And add therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. It rewires the shame, the thoughts, find a free clinic, Third, make amends wherever possible. Apologize without excuses. It's okay to be vulnerable and to say, I hurt you, I'm sorry, but, you can never blame it on how intoxicated you were. And therapy has helped me too a lot. My counselor, has helped me with a lot of stuff. And, sometimes I feel like I talk to her about things I can't talk to with anyone else. And that's something that has worked great for me. But, you just got to try to find your self-worth, and remember that you can't control what happened yesterday. You can only control what happens tomorrow. An additional exercise is daily affirmations. So, it's people say it's corny, but, say yourself in the mirror, I will do this. Now let's talk about using hardships as momentums instead of weaponizing trauma. Oh, my vape's dead. But the arrests, the ODs, the betrayals, all that is heavy. But you can't really weaponize it against yourself or others. Weaponizing means using trauma as an excuse. I can't change because of what happened. Nah, you need to turn it into momentum and energy. For me, those hardships, I couldn't feel sorry for myself anymore. I couldn't deal with no trust in my life daily, with, waking up with the next day being, worse than the day before, because it just never got better. Don't get me wrong, I had a lot of good times, but it is a whole different kind of happiness, what I went through then versus what I feel now, because all I have now is big picture happiness and happiness that lasts, you know. But, you know, list specifics, you know, survival skills, job skills, and, you know, let it become your testimony, and eventually mentor your others. Your pain can become purpose, and that's why I'm here on Fed by Fire, trying to turn my mess into momentum and start small. You know, share it in a group, maybe in a meeting. Step 3, set goals, you know, fueled by it, because, you know, I lost years to all this bullshit. I'll gain them back by building a business, or in my case, a home, a job, and a family. Momentum builds speed, and you could use SMART goals like specific, measurable, etc. Avoid pitfalls, and don't romanticize the past. And, you know, don't blame shift, own it. Then launch from it. You know, I decided last year that, you know, I had one shot to fix all this, and I took it. And if I can use that as fuel and not a weapon, then you can too. Exercise a trauma timeline. Map all your hardships, then arrow the positive outcomes of it, and how one door closed in your life, it potentially opened up another. And, you know, it's always a big part. You know, we're going a little longer on this today, just so I can share with you guys a little more stuff. We're going to talk about gaining back your family's trust and what it feels like, because that's something I've felt lately. Regaining trust, it's a marathon, not a sprint. At first, it's going to feel like climbing a mountain with pebbles in your shoes, painful, slow, frustrating. Your family, they might doubt you, they might turn you away, test you, and, you know, it hurts, but it's real. You know, for me, I had to get through that. I'd been gone, unreliable, but now, you know, over a year sober, I have great relationships with my dad and, you know, other people who I just made their lives hell with them having to worry all the time. But it's the small wins, you know, and being consistent. It might feel awkward at first with short conversations and those side-eyed hugs. And, you know, you'll get there, though. There will be deep connections, laughter, and it'll feel like a breath of fresh air after years underground, you know. You got to get past the anger and past the hurt and past the resentment, you know, and bargaining acceptance. And, you know, how do you do it consistently? Show up on time every time, mean what you say what you mean, listen more than you talk, boundaries help, make sure you respect theirs. And, you know, using all this, you know, worked for me. I used everything I'm telling you right now as tools, you know, and like I said, it might not work for you, but it worked for me. And with patience and, you know, the right determination, it can be the same for you. And, you know, before, when I was still in active addiction, I was on the sidelines. You know, I was absent. I wasn't there for my daughter. She was with my mom. I was basically a ghost in my kid's life. But now it's real. It's transformative. It feels like stepping into sunlight after being in the dark for so long, and scary at first. What if I mess up? But it was rewarding seeing their eyes light up, because at the end of the day, they just want to be a part of your life. That's really it. And, you know, I was there, but I wasn't present, you know. And that's something I got to live with. But, you know, I'm center stage now, at home, at work, with her, daily life. You know, I ask about her day, I get her ready for school in the morning, you know, and all that is stuff that I didn't really have a part in before, and has just meant so much to me. And, you know, when I think about potentially going back out and doing the things that put me in such a bad way, I just think about, you know, those memories that I've had in the last year and how rewarding they have been. And, I'm just so glad that I'm here right now and able to share this with you and create Fed by Fire, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a platform for, every ordinary people to talk and tell their story and, maybe inspire others that, you can fight the good fight and that you don't have to be like a statistic. Now, if you're locked up, use those same routines that you had in jail on the streets. The wake-up calls, the meals, the workouts, the lights out. They structure. Chaos on the streets, the chaos returns, but, you can adapt. After, my little time I've done, the structure I brought home helped me a lot. It helped me build a routine and discipline, and it reduces temptation. Wake up at 6 a.m., reflect, exercise, and just try to place your attention to the little things, like even making yourself a good meal. But now working at my warehouse job with my partner, it definitely keeps me grounded. If your night shift, flip it, add accountability. And, if you're on probation, make sure you're on good terms with your PO, because she holds the keys to your freedom. And try to find hobbies. Like for you, it might be going to the gym. For me, I have found that my hobbies consist of hanging with family and working on the podcast. And then I've read a book that'll be on Amazon as well called Fed by the Fire. It'll be out in a couple months. Let's talk about the next segment, staying positive when the challenges look impossible. Relapses, urges, job rejections, old friends calling. If it looks impossible, just stay positive. For me, post-release, it felt impossible. But, with the right, support system and just being grateful, and I don't know what your religious beliefs might be, but making a stronger relationship with God has very much helped me in a lot of ways. And it's going to be hard, but if you've been doing this for however long, just know you've survived worse. And it's so easy to do wrong. It's a lot harder to do right, but not impossible. Just stay positive, listen to positive podcasts, use your affirmations, exercise, journal, write, calculate your wins, and even the little wins, But we've covered everything in depth: deciding enough, redirecting energy, shredding guilt, fueling purpose with your hardships, rebuilding trust, parenting, routines, and how to stay positive in a storm. And I'm living proof, sitting here with you today, that you can do it. I know usually on Fed by Fire we're breaking down cases, and we're going to have some more of those, but I just wanted to share a little bit more of my story and give you guys a little more of a personal episode. I'm always looking for guests. If you're interested in coming on and having a conversation with me, or me having a conversation with you, we could set it up or do it via StreamYard. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you on the next one.